So I'm very pleased to introduce this first panel of speakers. A reminder to please save all your questions to the end. We'll have about 15 minutes at the end for discussion. So our first speaker will be Ella Haley. Ella grew up on a dairy and poultry farm in Brant County. She is a fourth-generation resident of her community. She and her husband, Richard Turnstall, have a small organic farm, Heart's Content Organic Farm. They are founding members of the Langford Conservancy, which cares for and operates the Langford Schoolhouse as a rural community hub. They are also founding members of Sustainable Brant, Better Brant, a watchdog group pushing for better land use policies, including adding Brant County to the Greenbelt. Next, we have Rahul Mehta. Rahul is a community advocate raised as a settler on the traditional territories of the Mississauga of the Credit, today known as Mississauga. His role in the not-for-profit sector includes food rescue, urban data collection, and transportation, and presently he's connecting social and environmental issues as the program worker for a newcomer cycling program called Mississauga Cycles. Mehta founded Sustainable Mississauga in 2018 and co-founded Shop Sprawl Peel in 2021, which works to educate, inform, and mobilize residents across Peel region to protect our remaining farmland and green space. Welcome, Rahul. Our final speaker will be Amanda Wilson, who is a professor in the School of Social Innovation at St. Paul University in Ottawa on unceded Algonquin territory. Her areas of focus include carceral food systems, food movements, collective organizing, and questions related to prefiguration and enacting a politics of possibility. Outside of academia, she has worked with several non-governmental organizations in the area of policy analysis, research, network coordination, and popular education, and is a longtime community organizer and activist. Welcome, Amanda. So each panelist will have 15 minutes. And as I said, we'll have about 15 minutes for a discussion. Our fellow organizer here, Dave Thompson, will be giving you a 2-minute warning when you're approaching time. So please go ahead, Ella, when you're ready.
The speakers decided I'd have different speaking orders. Sorry, Taryn.
Okay,
I'm last. Okay. I'm last.
Okay, so who will we hear from first?
I believe I will be going first, if I'm not mistaken.
Go ahead.
Yes, surprise everyone. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. Now the tricky part to see if Zoom will cooperate, and I'll get my slides right on up here. Just bear with me for a moment. Okay, can everyone see those slides okay?
Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And again, I really appreciate this opportunity. I'm one cog in the system working to create change, hopefully in our community. Please let me know at any time if you can't hear me or if there's any technical issues, and you can always add questions to the chat. So my name is Rahul Mehta. Thank you for that kind introduction. I'm co-founder of Stop Sprawl Peel, excuse me, and I am founder of Sustainable Mississauga, as mentioned. In the background, you can see an image, one of many, of the city of Mississauga, where I'm based. And it looks all well and good. However, the kind of darker truth is all that treescape you see hides a problem. It hides a decision to continue a cycle of sprawl throughout the Greater Toronto area and to create a disconnect from our food systems, from how we wish to move around, being forced to use cars, and how we hope to change the future of planning in this community, and therefore the future of people who wish to live here affordably and sustainably. So growing up in this city has taught me a lot, and it very much has shaped what I'll be sharing in the slides to come. What's really important to me today is also to highlight my fellow co-founder, Jenny Le Forestier. Jenny is an incredible woman, an incredible mother, friend, teacher, champion. She's, of course, the co-founder of the group I'm speaking to today, and founder of the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition. Jenny is really the heart and soul behind everything that is shared here and by other Stop Sprawl groups in the region. Tragically, she passed away last fall, just several months into this particular project, unexpectedly from cancer, and it has been a devastating loss. And I center her and her power and her value and her leadership as a woman which faces headwinds like many women do, unfortunately. And I am here thanks to her leadership. And so I just wanted to recognize her, and I will share in the link if it's appropriate afterwards. There is a fundraiser for her family to support them moving forward. So I just wanted to spend a moment to speak to her. I did not expect to be in this role. I did not expect to be here today. It's been one small step at a time, one series of happenstances, of actions that came across me. Someone in Mississauga who had very little knowledge of the value of our Greenbelt, of our farmland and food spaces. It grew over time as I used the skills that I had, my advocacy efforts, my desire to speak up. I like to speak, if you have noticed, and connecting with my community in a fairly quiet, despite massive suburb, which is Mississauga, a sleepy suburb, appropriately named. As these campaigns have grown, so have local residents' interest and awareness of these issues. And it has turned into something much bigger than any of us would have expected, as residents in this sleepy suburb have woken up, not just in Mississauga, but across Peel region. And I hope to share some lessons today. It's never too late to get involved. That's really important. You don't have to be a speaker. You don't have to be a protester. You don't have to be a counselor. You have to be yourself, and you have to trust in the process and trust that there is a community out there waiting to support you. So I'm going to try and highlight the journey of Stop Sprawl Peel today in these categories of taking stock of understanding yourself and what you can bring to the table, focusing the target, and then nurturing what I call the collective, which is a very nice word to me. It does remind me a lot about the food systems and amazing people at the NFU. This is also Mississauga, and this is the widest stretch of the largest and widest highway in Canada, the 401, which they recently doubled. This picture is since full of cars just a year after they doubled it, because when you make the space for cars, more cars will fill it. This is more of what I want. I want community. I want people to see each other, hear each other, be able to see connected habitats and connected food systems to our cities, not in isolation from one another. But it's not that simple. There's a lot of work to be done. So in understanding myself, in Jenny understanding herself, in the people involved in Stop Sprawl Peel, it was really about looking at what are our values, what are our interests, and what are the opportunities for a better community. So this is before Stop Sprawl Peel came to life, and we are one of many similar groups I'm sure some of you have heard of, Stop Sprawl Hamilton, for example. I care a lot about connected communities. I am frustrated by seeing beautiful images like on the top right never be realized beyond the document. I see the climate change crisis and I see what's causing it. It's not individuals. It is, and it's not agriculture. Let's be very clear on that. It's predominantly the built environment and the transportation systems. And this is speaking to Peel region, which still has, thankfully, a fair share of natural and agricultural resources, predominantly in Caledon. I see this sharp boundary line speaking to the division between communities where it's either one versus another, and that frustrates me. I want to see us speak more to our common ground rather than what divides us. People to the south of this image in the houses rely on that farmland, perhaps even more than the people that are generating that resource for us. Yet we don't seem to agree on many things if you trust what the media tells us. So these are some of the things I cared about and continue to care about. How can I channel that into what are the issues happening in my neighborhood in Peel? So, this is a long-standing issue. This isn't something that has just come from the provincial government of today, the Ford government, although they are a major cause and effect of the issues we see. in the red, that ribbon you see, this is kind of the north third of Peel region. So north of Brampton, going from Vaughan to Milton, this is what is called GTA West or Highway 413. This is a big deal because this sets the stage for continuing that couple of towers in the downtown, sprawl as far as the eye can see pattern, which Mississauga began so many decades ago, and municipalities have continued to imitate, much to their debt in the years since. So this highway says, you know what, we're going to add another layer. We did the 401, we did the 407, we privatized that. Let's go further with the claim of more space for drivers. And we know how that's worked out on the 401. So this highway is really a recipe for sprawl. And it's not a surprise when you look at, darn, I got the animation wrong here, but thankfully Peel is still visible. You can see most of what's called the big sprawl, which is countryside endangered. This includes greenbelt lands, conservation lands, and agricultural lands in green, with orange being areas that are already built out or scheduled for being built. The real threat is what comes next. It is a highway pulling the sprawl further north. Again, in the case of Peel, in other municipalities, it's just sprawling in all directions. And it is one or the other from the point of view of the government. This was true for prior governments as well. You know, Highway 413 was proposed in the past, but now it has been brought back with a vengeance. We call it the zombie highway. And so for me, someone who wants to see those policy documents come into reality, see the reinvestment in transit rather than car infrastructure, this is a major step backwards. And this is the big issue for Peel. Are we going to invest in our communities, or are we going to divest, I guess you could say, from the agricultural and natural resources which have provided so much for us, with climate change providing even more for us, a buffer? So this ties to my interests, values really well. They tie to the opportunities for our community too. Mississauga has built out, and yet if we allow this within the region of Peel, where we have a key say, we are going to continue this pattern of mistakes in Brampton, Caledon, and beyond. So this became very clear to me very quickly in around 2021 that I need to invest in this issue. And is there a movement that I can support? This is the collective. What exists out there? What can you create and what can you support in your community? Who are or who could be the allies in community groups, media, or government? And again, folks like Jenny, who were doing the hard work on the ground from day one, you know, she's not just a teacher, she was advocating for protecting our water resources and farmland. Jenny was one of many amazing individuals, perhaps unsurprisingly women predominantly, who were doing work in Hamilton, in Halton, in Durham, in Simcoe on the same common thread, because it seems to be the big issue everywhere right now, stopping the big sprawl. Now, this is again a broad term. It doesn't capture the nuance of each community, but Stop Sprawl Hamilton and Stop Sprawl Halton were the first to say, we don't see a collective, so let's create one. And this was coming together in the dual opposition of highways, so Highway 413 and the Bradford Bypass being the biggest ones, and urban boundary expansions. So if I go back an image, that's the orange moving in all directions. That is the urban boundary expansion, expanding where mostly single-family housing and warehouses can be developed. So more groups started to form, and I'm pleased to say Stop Sprawl Peel was one of the early groups out of the 8 or so that have now since formed to tackle this issue in our own community, while making sure we kept tabs on the larger issue, which is, after all, provincial. So these groups really coming together now, it was about starting quiet, starting strategic, understanding what the issue was on the ground. So what are the timelines for the urban boundary expansion in Peel, in Hamilton, in Halton? The province had imposed new rules since about June of 2020 through amendments to the growth plan, forcing municipalities to not just increase their urban boundaries, although Hamilton and Halton said no thanks, but to increase their timeline. So not to 2041, but 2051. Now, some may say planning for the future, that's great, but they were baking in sprawl even further into the future. So it was a very perverse a reuse of that definition. And the result was we knew we had a long fight ahead of us. So the work has really just started, but we had to come together fast because it's very easy for us to get caught in our local issue and lose the forest really for the tree, the individual tree in this case, the small local building, the NIMBY battle, the YIMBY battle. So yes or not in my backyard. The real issue was, how do we make this province listen and understand that Ontarians are against this type of development moving forward into the future and right now is proposed in our urban boundaries. Of course, this requires funding as well. You know, it's great for us to protest and connect and collectively organize. But groups like Small Change Fund have been absolutely essential. Small Change Fund is a place where so many of the Stop Sprawl projects, water conservation efforts have been given a platform for free to do fundraising under a nonprofit organizing body. And that was essential for us to be able to quickly raise some funds to get the word out, get some signs, get some flyers, and again, start to connect residents on the ground, their local issues, right? So what is their values and issues to this bigger issue that can often seem very distant, especially, and Peel is unusual in this way, but especially in our suburb, which is so quiet. I cannot tell you, 1.5 million people and a dozen showing up to a protest is very unnerving. So I think the lessons from Peel are the worst case scenario in some cases. So I am excited to see the opportunity and action each of you can or already are taking in your community be amplified from some of the lessons we had here. So if you haven't heard of Small Change Fund yet, check it out. Give them a call. They are an incredible ally in helping us organize and fund our efforts. And then there was so much more. We had community. So we had events. Environmental Defense was critical to helping us amplify these events, a nonprofit that put their platform aside really and put us front and center. Stop Sprawl groups, Stop Sprawl protests, organizing events, a central map where we could highlight where all our rallies were happening. And that's true again for this year. So YTP weekend is yours to protect. It's coming back for a second year, April 21st to 23rd. We celebrated the food systems by bringing urbanites and suburbanites out to rural lands to walk and enjoy the richness of it all and how it actually provides for us. We also had media, so much media. And, I'm kind of quite uncomfortable speaking up and being in media, but I was willing to take on that role because for me, it's where some of my skill set lies. And so once we had organized these foundational groups, Stop Sprawl Peel, Halton, Hamilton, once we had amplification from Environmental Defense, once we had funding of many residents that allowed us to then reach out to them and have more people attend our protests, the media started to pay attention. So it started with some of the non-traditional media like Rabble, like Briar Patch. It went onward into some local media, which is very limited in Peel. Again, it's part of our unusual quiet nature, but the Pointer, an incredible investigative journalism outlet. And then it really started to pick up speed. We got on the national on CBC. I was so excited to share our story with residents right across the country who are starting to or have already been there and done that when it comes to battles like this. We even got on radio and it was fun. It wasn't always doom and gloom that this is the struggle, this is the battle. It was about what comes next. What is our vision for a more sustainable future that is now in jeopardy? And why is it so important for you, the listener, the viewer, to get involved? So these were really strategies. And how do we get different people involved based on where they are listening, where they choose to take action? It's not always a protest. And finally, we had allies in government at our side. This was crucial. We very quickly realized, as I'm sure most here have, that the province really isn't interested in playing ball. They're not interested in negotiating. They're not interested in listening to even their own experts, consultations. In fact, they approved urban boundary expansions while the consultation period was still underway. So very disturbing changes. and we saw allies in government. Municipal governments have really quickly coalesced, especially through AMO and FCM, to demand no Greenbelt cuts. All of the opposition parties have not just demanded it, they have shown action by putting forward requests for investigations, and these requests have borne fruit. So we now have investigations happening on multiple fronts to hold the provincial government accountable. And the Stop Sprawl movement, especially I'd say in Peel, which is again often the quietest, but also the most electorally significant for votes, is pushing this demand forward. If your MPP and MP doesn't hear from you, especially in your riding, it can be difficult for them to say, you know, we should really put this risk forward of asking for an investigation. It's not a typical thing. So these investigations are really part and parcel of seeing different groups come together and say, yes, we agree, we had our interests, but we agreed this is the big issue. And so this is a way to keep the province's feet to the fire, and also for our sakes, for the community's interests, to keep the issue relevant, because there's still a lot of people who don't know what's happening.
Trying to wrap up, Rahul.
Thank you so much. And so here's my last slide, and we really have a lot of work ahead of us. We see the province and unfortunately some large developers not showing interest in giving back to community, investing in community, as opposed to sprawling into farmland. But for every cut, there is more pushback. For every rollback, there is more alliances forming. And so for us at Stop Sprawl Peel, while the work has just started, we're just a year old now as of March of this year, we see the municipal and federal partners, we see the local media, and we see the community groups as essential to keeping the pressure on, and not, and this is very important for someone like me, not putting the burden and the pressure on the individual. It should not be a single leader or speaker or media face, like I am sometimes, that will solve this problem. And so while I'm honored to be here, I acknowledge that it's not about me, and don't expect to win every battle. You need to monitor, evaluate, and nurture that community. And in Peel, that is the future of our community. That is the next generation that's coming. And we want to make sure they understand that there is another day to fight, and it's never too late to join our movement. So please, I look forward to your questions. StopSprawlPeel.org is where you can find us and myself. And I hope more of you will be excited to join your local movement and know that there is still so much hope to turn this ship around. Thanks a lot.
Really great. Thanks, Rahul. I'll invite our next speaker, Amanda Wilson. Amanda, when you're ready.
Great, thank you. And so I will just go ahead and share my slides here. Okay. So thanks so much for inviting me to chat with everyone today from unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. Just want to flag our household is battling a bit of some sort of non-COVID plague. So if I seem a bit under the weather or disoriented, it's because we're battling some viruses over here. So I'm going to chat a bit, and I think in many ways make a lot of sort of links and continue the discussion from points that Rahul was just making. I made a little tweak to the name of the panel, Fighting the Good Fight, the Power of Community Activism, recognizing that folks are not necessarily citizens engaged in this work. But then really looking, at food and food systems as a lens for collective action and social transformation. So I'm going to talk specifically about one campaign in particular that I've been privileged enough to support over the past little while, a campaign to stop the construction of a prison on some pretty great farmland in Kentville. But then also, assuming we have a few moments at the end, just share some broader reflections on how we can be more effective in our movements in general. So kind of where I'm coming from. So as my sort of bio spiel said, so I'm a professor, so I'm engaged in a lot of sort of food movement research in my work, but I also have a background and more on kind of the practical side, both as working with several food systems based organizations in my professional work. And then my partner and I also used to run a small scale organic vegetable farm. And then also for a long time, I've been involved in lots of different community organizing and activism. And so what I'm going to share today is really blending all of those sort of three perspectives together. And I think, one of the things that I find so interesting about food is thinking about food and food systems as a lens that we can both unpack a lot of the problems that we see in our society, be they environmental, social, or economic, but that food and food systems can also be a lens to transform society and build, hopefully, a better world. So the group I'm going to chat a little bit about is called CAP, which stands for Coalition Against the Proposed Prison. And so it was a campaign started by residents in Kentville, Ontario, after learning that the provincial Ford government planned on building sort of a new large prison on the lands of the former Ontario Agricultural College in Kentville. I was on maternity leave at the time, but had sort of heard the work they were doing and felt like it was something that I felt really called to support and engage in. So I think it's important to put the asterisk that I am not a member of CAP. I would describe myself as sort of an ally and supporter, and I've been lucky enough to support and participate in their campaign in various ways. And they know I'm here talking about the campaign, but that I don't live in Kentville, and so I'm not necessarily a direct member of the campaign. So just to sort of situate us a little bit, I'm sure many of you know Kentville. So we're talking, about 45 minutes south of Ottawa. And you can see here on the screen on the right in red, these are the proposed lands slated for the prison development. So it's roughly 180 acres, predominantly class 2 soils. There's some class 3, but so we're talking about pretty decent farmland here. This is a sort of a mock-up from the government in terms of what the proposed site might look like. So at this point, it's quite unclear, how much of the lands, will be physically turned into, the actual prison grounds, how much might just be sort of, buffer area around. There is a potential that they would sell some surplus farmlands, and you can see that section just sort of in shaded in red there at the bottom. But at this point, there's no clear indication. And so the campaign has sort of been proceeding on the assumption then that the full 180 acres are under threat. So I'm just going to quickly share a few photos of the lands in question because they are quite beautiful. And these are photos taken by Jane Rudder, who's a local photographer in the area. And so the campaign is both about preserving the farmlands, but also there's quite a few beautiful buildings on the site that folks would like to preserve as well. So these are just a few shots to give you a sense. And so I think the campaign is based on several different issues that I'll just run through really quickly. One is that there's been a real lack of transparency and community consultation. The announcement that the province had selected this site to build a prison was a surprise to residents and to the municipality of North Grenville, where Kentville is located. And throughout the campaign, really over the past 2 years, community residents have had to fight really tooth and nail to get any information from the government in terms of the site selection process, the costs, what some of the implications might have been. So there's, I think, been a real erosion of trust in government and sort of a commitment to democratic processes that we've seen here. I think the second one is obviously one of the key issues for a lot of folks is that the idea that we're going to pave over high quality arable land that is publicly owned in the context of, climate catastrophe, in the context of food insecurity, broader farmland loss, challenges in terms of farm renewal. It just seems like the worst decision that the government could be making. There's also concerns around cost. Estimates are that it'll cost up to $499 million over the life of a public-private partnership to design, build, and finance and maintain this prison. Kemptville is, a relatively small community, and so there are really a lot of concerns about the lack of services and supports for both incarcerated folks and their loved ones. So really simple things like, if their families live in Ottawa, there's not really a lot of available transportation options to go and visit incarcerated folks. Should incarcerated folks be, released on day patrol within the Kemptville community, there's not a lot of organizations to support them in reintegration and kind of, building up skills, identifying jobs, doing all of that important work. There's also, I would say, growing evidence that actually building new prisons is quite an ineffective way to keep our community safe, and that prisons are, I think, would argue, fundamentally harmful institutions, and that if we're interested in reducing harm, building bigger institutions to continue harming people is probably not the best way to go to reduce harm. Last but not least, these lands are obviously unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. And so if the government is talking about doing something else with these lands, that they should definitely be part of that conversation, and we should be taking leadership from those who have traditionally stewarded and cared for these lands in terms of the options moving forward. And certainly, there are a million different options for these lands that would be better than a prison, right? Lots of people have talked about, a community farm, different community hubs, right? Larger community garden space, putting in a community orchard. There's, we could come up with a million different ideas that would be a great use for these lands, that is not building a large 235 bed prison. So just to give folks kind of a brief rundown on the timeline. So it was in August 2020 that the Ford government announced plans to build what they're calling the Eastern Ontario Correctional Complex at the site of the former agricultural college. And very quickly, residents got together and sort of mobilized to both, inform their communities, garner support, and really try to pressure both local and provincial government officials to understand how the decision was made, but also, advocate that we shouldn't be building a new prison and we should be saving these farmlands. I wanted to note this point here about, so the local MPP, Steve Clark, actually complained to Elections Canada about the local groups that were protesting the prison, saying that they were somehow interfering in democratic processes, and the complaint was quickly dismissed. But I think it again shows you that the government has been quite combative with residents about this, and really have not had any sort of spirit of collaboration or community consultation. Just to move us right along. So there's been, various steps in the campaign. We tried to make it very much an election issue, and all of the opposition parties have indicated their opposition to this plan. Unfortunately, the plans continue to move forward to the point where this past August, CAP and JOG, who serve a sister organization, actually took the government to court and filed a judicial review to try to stop the construction of the prison and save the farmlands. And so I'll talk about that in just a second. But one thing, or a few things I wanted to highlight about this campaign that I think is useful learning for us, even though they haven't yet been successful, fingers crossed they will be. One is that they've really utilized a diversity of tactics. So they've organized marches, rallies, community forums to engage local residents and folks, from Ottawa, Kingston, Peterborough. They've done a lot of grassroots work, handing out information flyers, getting folks to write op-eds. They've had sort of a continuous stream of letters to various provincial officials. They've made delegations to city council. If you drive around Kemptville, you will see these no prison and save farmland signs dotting many residences' front lawns. They filed freedom of information requests, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And I think they've been quite effective in using various social media platforms to kind of get their message out. And then last but not least, this judicial review that I'll just highlight a little bit more. On that theme of sort of eroding democratic trust and principles, this is a list of all of the access to information requests that the campaign has made. And you will see a similar pattern in terms of how the government has responded. So really at every step of the way, they have refused to provide information, And so then the organization CAP now has to go and appeal that decision. And so there's really a pattern of the government really not wanting to engage with residents and community folks about why they made their decision and kind of justifying whether or not that was a good call. So I just want to highlight briefly this legal strategy because I think it is potentially very significant and precedent setting. So as I said, in August they filed, and so in September it's been an ongoing legal campaign. I would say they just had a day in court earlier this week to argue the merits of the case. And so the argument that CAP and JOG are making is that the Ford government violated its own provincial policy statement because the provincial policy statement makes reference to agricultural resources and the need to preserve and protect agricultural lands. The argument is that usually provincial governments don't have to abide by municipal bylaws. And so just because it's zoned something doesn't mean they have to respect that, but they are explicitly required to abide by their provincial policy statement. And so the argument is that in this case, they are not doing so. And so I think if successful, this judicial review will actually establish a really important precedent for other folks to use a similar strategy if there are planned infrastructure projects, whether it's a highway or a new institution, a new jail, being built on agricultural lands, that they can actually use this as a precedent to try and fight the government on that, hopefully. The other thing I wanted to highlight about the campaign that I think has been particularly significant is its ability to garner diverse supporters. And so really by blending together those campaign goals of, stopping the prison and preserving farmland, they've been able to get folks involved more so from, sort of food and farming organizations, but also organizations involved in sort of prisoner justice and advocacy work. So I won't run through the full list there, but it gives you a sense of the diversity of supporters to the campaign that I think is unique because they've been able to bridge those two issues together. And that includes NFU Ontario. So folks wrote a great letter that I just included snippets of here on the slide. So it's been really important to have folks like NFU Ontario write letters of support and say, hey, these lands need to be protected, and we don't think that building a prison is an appropriate use of these high quality farmlands. And I think that's my 2-minute warning. All right. And I think fundamentally it's because we're stronger when we work together. And I think if CAP had just focused on a campaign that was about saving the farmlands, they wouldn't have been able to connect and speak with as many people as they have been able to. Similarly, if they were just focused on a campaign strategy of stopping the prison, they wouldn't have engaged folks who are more concerned about environmental issues, who are more concerned about saving that farmland. And so I think it's been a real big strength being able to put these two campaign goals together and really build a much more integrated, diverse campaign. So these are just a couple links if folks are interested in getting involved or supporting CAP's campaign. Their website is there. You can also just Google CAP Kemptville and you will find things. I'm not going to have time to run through all of these, but maybe I'll just close on some reflections on how we can build more effective movements. I think one of them is having a good strategy, knowing what it means to win, right? And how we're going to get there. So having a clear campaign goal and then a pathway set out of how we're going to get there. I think using a diversity of tactics and tactics that fit the moment. I think we sometimes have a tendency, we get into ruts of, particular tactics that we like using. And so we just do those on repeat, no matter the context. And I think there are different tactics that meet particular moments and having the openness and flexibility to explore those different tactics to meet those particular moments. And a lot of that is because organizing should be fun and nourishing, right? If people show up to a protest and don't enjoy themselves, they're probably not going to come back. If a meeting is 7 hours long and super boring, that's probably not something they're going to want to do on their spare time again. So building movements and campaigns that are fun and are empowering and nourishing for folks. Building strong and vibrant coalitions. I think that's something that CAP has been really successful in doing because they've had sort of that broad focus in terms of what they're trying to achieve. And lastly, having a balance between resistance and possibility, right? Yes, we're often protesting against something, but also having a vision of what's possible beyond that, right? Having some sort of hopeful alternative possibility that we're hanging onto and working towards. So it's not just, there's my timer. If I can turn it off. There we go. So that we're not just, feeling negative all the time. So I'm going to jump way ahead to my last slide just to say thank you. Looking forward to chatting. And I just wanted to flag if folks, if this has piqued your interest in these types of issues, we are organizing a Carshall Food Systems Summit where CAP will be one of the panelists coming up next weekend in Ottawa. So that is a chance to learn more about that campaign if that's of interest. All right, thanks so much.
Thanks, Amanda. That was so great. And as Dave said, all the things we missed out on in your slides. Next time, we'll get to it in the discussion, hopefully. So Ella, go ahead when you're ready, Ella.
Good morning. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, and I may need help at slide 8, Ashley, with the film. Okay, we'll try to go over the first part quickly because we're going to look more at the solutions, but we'll give you some background. Okay, go ahead. Richard.
Okay, right.
Okay, so I'm Ella Haley and my husband Richard Tunstall, and we have Heart's Content Farm, and we formed the Langford Conservancy in 2012. Next slide. Okay, we keep hearing about the whole thing about we're losing pristine, valuable farmland in the Greenbelt, but we're being plundered in Brant County. I'm 4th generation. Richard married a farm girl. He got a good deal, but I work him pretty hard. We have a history of protecting land here. We stopped a highway interchange. We've been at this for 35 years. So in 1988, we stopped a highway interchange. And I think Dave liked my story of me jumping in the pit in front of the bulldozers. So but we are feeling the impact of being left out. We are 1 field away from the Greenbelt. And so we wanted in the end of our presentation to really look at creative solutions such as conservation easements, community bonds, ground leases, cooperatives, and on-farm diversification. So there's the Greenbelt. You can see the slide, and you can see we're Brant County. We're 1 field away from the Greenbelt. My parents' farm is, and so is our farm. And you can see that we look like we have no natural heritage. We look like we have no Grand River watershed, and it really affects us. Okay, next slide. There's the Greenbelt line there, and you can see the Grand River watershed. You can see how much we have the headwaters there of the Grand River, and this needs protection too. Next. So here's a timeline. 35 years ago, Highway 403, Ministry of Transportation expropriated part of my parents' farm, cut it in 2, but they wanted to also cut it to pieces with an interchange. And we stopped that. We rallied the community for 2 years, and we stopped a $5 million interchange. Then in 2005, the Greenbelt was created, 1 field away from my parents' farm, and they predicted leapfrog development, and that's what we got. The developers came in. Walton came in from Calgary, bought up 5,000 acres of land. In our community of Langford, bought up 620 acres of mainly prime farmland. And yeah, it was all farmland basically that they were buying. And when we searched the deeds, we found that each farm had 650 owners from Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong. That was the majority of the owners. Then in 2007, 2008, there was proposed Highway 424. And they were looking at different routes, including right in our neighborhood. So there was a big fight, and we worked with other communities in Flamborough and Puslinch, and there was a Stop 424 fight. The government didn't like, next slide, the government didn't like that we were saying Stop 424. We weren't the key organizers, but basically now it's been relabeled. It's a 400 series highway. It's been relabeled the Brantford to Cambridge corridor. In 2012, yeah.
That highway was designed to run Highway 403 to the 401.
Yeah, to connect 200 to 400 series highways. So we've been told by the Ministry of Transportation that our area is predicted to have extreme growth, and we're prime farmland. 2012, we formed the Langford Conservancy, and we bought the Langford Schoolhouse, and we now operate it as a rural community hub with a certified kitchen, and it's an ideal place for a farmer's market. We've had our own farmers market there. And then 2016, the Ontario Liberal government talked about expanding the Greenbelt, and the key area to expand Greenbelt is land abutting the Greenbelt. So we were getting our hopes up. 2017, Brantford did the largest annexation of prime farmland in Southern Ontario in recent history. Between the 6,700 acres that it annexed, in exchange, Brant County got to do almost another 2,100 acres of sprawl. So it's about 9,000 acres of sprawl, mostly on prime farmland that's happening in Brant County around the edge of Brantford. 2021, we got our hopes up again. The Ontario Conservatives did another consultation to expand the Greenbelt. Then in 2022, Walton went into bankruptcy protection and it started selling off the Langford farms. And we started hearing that groups of 25 investors were pooling their money and buying up these farms. We haven't done the title search on who owns them now, but the prices have gone crazy. 2022, Bill 23, suddenly everybody's distracted with putting the fire out in the Greenbelt, and we're forgotten. We were supposed to have the Greenbelt expand and we were supposed to be protected. And meanwhile, the land is just being resold and going higher and higher. So we started working with the Centre for Social Innovation to buy a strategic farm in Langford to try to break this game. And there's the film, Ashley. I don't know if you can show it or we'll see if we can.
Yeah, I can show it.
Okay, thank you.
If folks can just let me know if they can hear it when I press play.
Developers jump over the Greenbelt. It's called leapfrog development. So in 2005,
louder.
the Greenbelt was made. Shortly afterwards, farmers would get together at the coffee shop and talk about who was the next millionaire, because they were being bought out by a land banking company with investors from the Far East and by other huge multinationals, 2 or 3 of them out of Calgary.
The reason that that's a concern is that that drives the price of land up. And for anybody that wants to get into farming, new and young farmers would have a difficult time being able to afford to buy farmland and continue to use it as farmland.
Some of the best farmland in the entire province is in this area, and a lot of it's been land banked.
A bit louder, Ashley.
Next, a lot of it has been labeled as suitable for development. And I do understand the pressure on individual farmers because we haven't supported our agribusiness. We haven't provided top-notch education for young farmers trying to make it. We haven't provided the land protection. And in fact, provincial and federal governments have done a lot of laissez-faire attitude around land banking.
All over, farmland is disappearing because of urban pressures and urban development, especially under the Place to Grow legislation, supposed to bring in like another, 6 million people or more by, was it 2030 or thereabouts? From what I see, what's happening around, say, Paris and Brantford, St. George, the development that is occurring is more of the same. Basically, it's sprawl. Because it's easy to build on farmland because it's clean, usually it's easy digging. That's a lot simpler for developers.
We're seeing far too many generational farms that have been in families for generations being ended and retired in a single generation to pay for one generation's retirement. And saying once that crop of houses, once those subdivisions get planted, there's no more food that will be grown on that land.
It's just disturbing to see because it's really permanent. It's like once those buildings are there, they're not leaving again. Like that is the last crop, is what they call it.
The first step is to protect farmland, which is disappearing at a huge rate. In Ontario, 173 football fields a day are basically paved over. But the next step is we need people to farm it. And there's a lot of interest in young people to do small organic farming. So our dream is to have an organic farm that young people can afford to lease and have multiple farmers on one farm so that they can learn from each other, share equipment, share experiences, and make it affordable to farm cooperatively.
One key game that developers play is they say, well, it's for employment land. So if it's to create jobs, often that's like the golden egg. So it gets an easier pass when they push for it to be converted from agricultural to, say, employment land. But once land is taken out of agricultural designation, even if it's designated into a golf course or into employment land, then it's much, much easier for developers to then convert it to residential.
The farmland issue is often put in this context of development and capitalism versus sustainability and environmentalism. And I think it's a false dynamic. I think we have to remember that agribusiness is the #1 industry in all of Canada, and if we forget that, one, we're not going to have food, but it's actually going to create a big hole in our economy.
Farmland is employment land. We create jobs, we feed people. It isn't wasted land, it's very, very valuable land. This area is known as the breadbasket. This is the very best farmland in Southern Ontario, in fact in Canada. And it's a jewel that we have to save.
How do we get back to this?
All right, back over to you guys.
Okay, just a moment here, and we'll go back into our, it was go down to 8. Just a moment. Go down. Okay, 9. Okay, so here's a common quote. This is related to the mega quarry, but this is what's, I'm sorry. Okay, we wanted to make it bigger. Just a moment here, full screen. And you see, sorry, we're just trying to go full screen. How do we do that, Ashley?
Elle, at the bottom of your screen,
Okay.
on the right, there's like a little icon that kind of looks like a projector. Bottom right, yeah.
Okay, there you go. Next slide. So this is a common feeling in our community. This is a man speaking about the mega quarry, but these land deals damage friendships, may never heal. Raised homesteads will never ever come back. The land buying tears people apart. It tears friendships apart. It tears families apart. People would say to you, how can you sell what your forefathers worked for? You see people at events who've been together all their lives, played hockey together. They turn their backs on each other. Will they ever get back to shaking hands? I don't think so. So it has a terrible impact on our farming community. So here's Walton, and this is the farmland between the two highways. You'll see there's 2 highways there. The one on the north is Highway 403, okay? And the one on the bottom is Highway 2 or Colburn Street now. But this is all prime farmland. It's not rezoned. And this is Walton selling their land. They're advertising to their potential buyers that it's commercial, industrial, residential. Okay, next slide. That's the Langford Schoolhouse, which is in the midst of all this land. Okay, next. And then there's the Blue Belt map that we designed, I believe 2016 we did, with the NFU supporting this. And so on the bottom left, you'll see in the blue, Brant County is part of the Blue Belt map. It was part of the original, or part of the expansion. We've been waiting and waiting to have the expansion. So that's the Blue Belt map. Next thing. And then here's some creative solutions. We've got, we wanted to just go through conservation easements, community bonds, eco-village, on-farm diversified use, ground lease, and cooperatives. So my mom, she outlived my dad by 10 years, and she put a conservation easement on this 3-acre pond. It's about a 25-acre piece of land, old growth forest, and then about a 20-acre farm field. This is 3 fields away from the Greenbelt. So a conservation easement, this is from California, but I'm just showing you a really easy explanation of it. With the conservation easement tool on the left, basically the landowner decides what they want protected. So they say, we want the forest protected. In many cases, we want it to be organic. We want this wetland to be protected. So you draw a map of your farm and you make it, you draw up and say what you want protected. And then how it works is at the bottom there, how it works is then it's protected it's protected forever. The federal government gets in on this, and a land trust holds a conservation easement. They check every year to see, are the conditions being met? You can sell your farm with the conservation easement, but the next owner and the owner after that, they have to honor this conservation easement. And then I'm just going to jump over to partners right now. So what you have, this is more in the States. In Canada, what happens is the federal government gives you a very generous tax break. So if you have a $900,000 farm, then the tax break for someone putting conservation easement on it would be about $200,000, which is equal to about $100,000 cash. And so therefore the selling farmer can sell the farmer for cheaper to a new farmer because they've been rewarded, they've been given these tax breaks. or tax credits. And so in the end,
2
you
minutes,
save a
Ella.
community. What's that? Time?
2 minutes.
Okay, so it benefits the rural community, it keeps it intact, it makes land affordable for new farmers. Next slide. Richard.
So one way of we're thinking of saving farmland is to offer community bonds. So community bonds are basically, it's like buying a share. So any community member can buy a bond or a share, and you use that money to finance your project, whether it's to, in our case, it would be to buy more farmland. But you have to find a way, you have to find a way to pay these people back, because they'll get their capital back plus a certain amount of interest. So, which means you have to come up with a plan to say, this is how much money we're going to be able to make on the farm in order to pay back the bonds. And that's the crucial part. So with the price of farmland, it's very difficult for a new farmer to be able to afford the initial cost and also make enough money to pay for supporting the farm strictly through farming. So on our next slide, this is an example of diversifying and looking, basically thinking outside the box, so they can have more farmers on one piece of farmland. And whole village does this by, in their municipality, a farm, a single dwelling is defined as a unit that has this one stove. So what they have is they have a central kitchen, and then they have from there they have spokes of apartments that come out from the central kitchen. So it's still classified as a single dwelling, even though, and I'm not sure how many people they have on that farm, but I think they have at least 7 or 8 units attached to the central kitchen. And so it basically becomes a community farm. And they do farming on it. They have greenhouses and organic farming set up there. So that's one example of thinking outside the box, where you can have more people on one farm and still use it as farmland. And there's lots of examples. They're in Brant County now, they're extending diversified what you can do on a farm to make a living other than just maybe the single crop or whatever the crop is that you have. So basically, you can look at value added. You can look at having related professions on the farm. You can look at agritourism, like a bed and breakfast or a farm stay. There's a lot of people that are looking into cideries or small beer making breweries. And anyway, there's lots of different things you can do on a farm that are more accessible, including having more units, housing units on a farm now. Used to be you could have one house plus a bunkhouse on a farm. Now you can have up to at least 2 dwellings on a farm, and maybe up to 4. We're going to be meeting with Brant County planners to see how many people we can have actually farming on one farm. And one way to do that, to make it more affordable for the farmers, is to have the farm, the idea is that the community land trust buys the farm. The land itself is leased, but people can own the property, like the house. So they have some stake in it, where they own the house, but the land is the commons, and they lease the land. So it makes it more affordable if they don't have to buy the land and the house as a whole unit.
And with the ground lease, what other land trusts do, equity trust is the very best practices that we can find. It's in the States, but we find they're excellent. We have different rules in Canada, but they're a good mentor. If you look, they have films and that of success stories. But You can create 20-year leases, lifetime leases. And so if somebody does buy the house on the farm, then if they do improvements and if they decide 10 years later to move on, then the house gets appraised and sold back to the land trust for the next farmer. But the new farmer gets to build equity.
And there are examples like the local food and farm co-ops that have a similar, where they can lend money to farmers for certain projects or equipment, that sort of thing. And then the farmers will pay that back over time. And
they also help you to form co-ops. It's a wonderful organization, and I think they're on the call.
And so, like we mentioned, we're meeting with the Center for Social Innovation to talk about the possibility of purchasing farmland and having multiple farmers on the land in order to be able to afford to pay back the community bonds that we raise.
And I'll just give you an example, like a farm recently sold, it was about 50 acres, and it's all sold privately, not even on the market. So in the end, the final price was $2 million for somebody that owns a shopping mall. And we know, basically, we stopped the highway interchange, but we're worried about the 400 series highway because they basically just waited for my parents to pass away. Time goes by, and now you've got people still lining up, amassing land, hoping for that highway. So for the 413, we are deja vu. We are basically deja vu. You bring the highway, you cut a farm in two, they went through the forests, and they can expropriate farmers, and then the developers come. So we're trying to be creative. Also, just for accountability, when we work with Center for Social Innovation, they have a separate organization that's called our business Tapestry. And Tapestry makes sure that you meet all the fiduciary responsibilities of paying back the community bond. So they hold your hand the whole way. They charge a fee, but it makes sure that you have a fiduciary responsibility to your lenders. Thank you.